You know, sometimes there are energies that come together. And it was my 35th birthday, and someone had suggested that I go to the Sweet Honey in the Rock concert in Boston. And I didn't know anything about Sweet Honey in the Rock, but they said, oh yeah, they're terrific. And I went, and they were fantastic. But before the concert, people were passing out all kinds of leaflets, you know, and all these pages coming down, and we got there early and got good seats, so I'm reading the material. And I come across this pamphlet about the peace camp. You know, someone was organized before this. This was February 26th. Someone was out there with pamphlets. And I looked at it, and I'll tell you something a little bit personal. At that point in my life, we just moved back from Australia, my husband, who is Australian, and my little boy, and myself. And I don't know if it was because of being back in my hometown or what, but I was having these, you know, why am I born as a female in this universe at this time? You know, like, what am I supposed to do? And this may sound crazy to you, but when I saw that pamphlet, I thought, this is what I'm meant to do. This peace encampment is going to be incredibly important. It's got to be covered. The mainstream is not going to cover it. And I'd just been learning video through the Somerville Producers Group. And I thought, that's why I have these skills. That's what I'm doing here. And so I went back and talked to the other women that were in the Somerville Producers Group, because it was a mixed group, sort of heavily guys at that time, but they were welcoming women into the group. And I said, anybody want to do this? And they did. So we got this little other meeting going and eventually named ourselves the Women's Video Collective. Not really because we knew what the word collective meant, I have to admit. It was just because we were impressed by the Boston Women's Health Collective. You know, our bodies, ourselves. So it's like all this stuff kind of, all these ripples coming together. But as soon as we decided to do it, various other women started, like Judy, heard about it and started coming. And some had video skills, a lot of them did not, but everyone just said, yeah, it's got to be covered. No one's going to know about it unless somebody covers it, and we'll do it. So then we started this huge effort, really. It didn't seem so big of an effort because we were all keen to do it, but every weekend several women would collect gear, and by that time I was working at a cable TV station, and so I was lending gear to people and jump into cars, drive for 8 hours, stopping after 4 hours at a friend of a friend who was on site and welcoming, and let everyone have a little swim in her little pond out the back, and, you know, refreshment, and maybe spend the night and then go the next morning, depending on how tired, how late on Friday we'd left Boston. 8 hours out to the camp for the weekend, leave there about 4 in the afternoon, get home routinely about 2 in the morning, and go to work the next day. And every weekend there was a different group of women who went. But of course people repeated, so I went 2 or 3 times over the summer, but all these other people went over the summer as well. And then we just started bringing back the tapes, and it was like, it was amazing. Well, it was nuclear weapons, you know. The United States had, as far as we knew, never put first strike nuclear weapons anywhere, and they were going to, I mean, this was a major change. They were going to put first strike nuclear weapons in Europe. Why? And it was the Reagan era, and it was pretty scary, you know, really scary stuff was happening in Central America, and we just got emboldened, I think, a little bit, because I don't know where it started, but there had just been a speak out about nuclear weapons in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was, Somerville, I think it was. And I was living in a big group house, and one of the people in our house was involved in organizing the speak out. I don't know how he was involved, but I went along, and for me, nuclear weapons had always been like this gigantic black cloud that was too big, and there was no way you could ever touch that, you know, like that was just this huge menace. But you couldn't do anything about it. And then all these people started standing up and speaking out and saying, you know, well, this shouldn't be. And all this kind of grassroots swelling up. And we were thinking, maybe you can say something about this. Maybe you can do something about this. But we didn't, like, to me it was seemed impossible, but why not try? It was because it was so audacious. And also camping. I mean, who wouldn't want to go camping in the summer in upstate New York? It was like everything was perfect. It wasn't, we're all going to meet in, the Antarctic in the winter. No, we're going to go camping. A huge camp of women. It sounded great. It was documentation from the start, because I had a job and I had a husband and a child and a lot of things that I had to do in the Boston area, so I couldn't just go. Claire, after she'd been there, decided that this was where she should be, and that what she should be doing with her skills is teaching other women video. And she put a lot of effort into that, and she stayed there for weeks. She was in that place in her life where she had that flexibility. She didn't have kids at that time, and so she could do that. I've been thinking on the train coming in about all the different things that people added to the whole project. Like, it wasn't any one person saying, we'll do this, this, and this. Like, Judy was really instrumental because she went to the screening of this fellow who was making the series and came back and said somebody would like us to do an edit. But she didn't know how to edit well enough. None of us did, except for this other woman, Linda Rubin, who wasn't really interested in the peace camp in that she didn't want to go, but she was willing to edit. And so she did the editing. None of the rest of us could have edited like Linda did at that time. I think people have learned those skills since, but at that time, Linda was the only one that could have done the edit. And Judy not only got us on public broadcasting, but she put in the little application for the JVC National Video Contest, and we won a camera, and then we went to Nairobi in 1985. It was like different people offered different things. So mostly what I did was, I guess you could say that many of the people who came into the group came in through me inviting them one way or another, running into them, talking it up. So I was kind of like the one that kind of and then they all did their thing. And the other thing that I did, because I was working at a cable TV station, I got cameras for people, and we loaned our car. That wasn't really so great because the car had problems, and it had problems with starting, so people were worried, if they needed to do a quick getaway from an action, could they get away in this car, which, you might have to try 20 times for it to start. And it also, toward the end, seemed to have kind of like a gas vapor coming into the car problem. And yeah, I mean, our car wasn't in great shape, but there were people who went in it and came back alive. I just thought, this story has to be told, and I just felt nobody else was going to tell it, and we found that was pretty much the case over the summer. Like at the opening of the peace camp, there was a television camera from Japan, and there was another television camera, I think it was Yugoslavia, and I think there was one from Italy. But this isn't far from New York City, or Boston, or Toronto, I said to my sister yesterday, I'm going to be interviewed at the airport about the peace camp, and she kind of furrowed her head and said, I said, in 1983, I was, she said, she couldn't remember it. Well, she was never involved in it. That wasn't her thing. So I'm just saying that she watches TV a lot. It wasn't on TV. And when I think about it now, and I think about, 5 years into a war in Iraq, and there's no peace camp anywhere that I know of, and I'd never heard of Greenham Common either. I was a babe in the woods when it came to peace camps. I don't know. At that time, there were people who were going to go down and stand on the border of El Salvador or Nicaragua or something, and that was really kind of way over the top scary to me. I couldn't have done that, and I could always say, well, I have a small child, and I think that's a legitimate reason to not put yourself into danger, but I don't have a small child anymore, but I still think that would be more than I could personally do. A big open cornfield. It was hard to walk across it. In fact, one of our first tracking shots that we learned we had to do better was crunching on the corn stalks. It was hot, thirsty work there. But it was full of campers, and I love camping. You know, that's one thing my parents always took us camping, so that I knew we could do. Now, for other people, camping wasn't something they could do. They didn't want to go camp, but they were happy to help log tapes or come to meetings, plan strategies, things like that, learn video. Everyone had their own thing that they were willing to do or were able to do. And I guess one of the major things that I remember about the whole project was the tension that arose within the group. There were people who wanted to learn video who didn't know it. There were people who knew a bit of video, and so there was this inclination when there was an important action or an important interview to say, well, you know, I better do it today because I know a bit more. And the other people would say, but when am I ever going to learn? And when are you going to set up training for us, the people in Boston? And that became a real issue in our group, that whole thing of this sort of mirage that people could come in and get trained and do it. You know, we had to make it real. And we didn't succeed 100% on that. But it was a real challenge. And I think that with video kind of stuff, that process versus product is just built into any kind of cooperative video work. You're always going to get people who want more time on the camera, so they'll be the one that can shoot the next. I think it was pretty much from early on. We wanted to hear everyone's opinion. It became sort of more built into the structure a bit later on when someone joined the group who knew what the word collective meant. And said, but I was told this was a collective. And we said, yeah. And she said, but a collective does this, this, and this. And we went, does it? Well, that was one thing. We traded roles all the time. So I may have done some camera work. I may have done some sound work. And I know at least once I had my 6.5-year-old son with me. So I would have, you know, maybe just been sort of carrying gear and keeping an eye on him kind of thing. I drove the car and probably helped people with knowing what to bring as far as camping goes, because I'd done a lot of camping, you know, make sure you bring this and that, and then somebody else went around and said, make sure you keep drinking water or you're going to pass out. I didn't know that much about drinking water, but we learned. I've been wondering whether I should tell this little anecdote, but I think I will. I mean, I remember one time when it was like probably the Saturday morning. So we'd got up, maybe we'd had a little walk, and we were walking back across the field, and there was a woman who was dressed only to her waist and was having an upper body wash, and she'd had a radical mastectomy. She was quite a young and attractive woman. And I was surprised. She appeared to have absolutely no inhibition or embarrassment about being public about her situation. And that made me feel much more positive about how a person could recover from quite a change. But my little son looked at her and looked at me because it didn't compute to him, you know. First of all, here's a woman with no clothes on, and she has only one breast. So, you know, like, there were times in his life when I took him to situations that had to be explained to him politely and quietly and diplomatically somewhere else. But I guess he got used to it as he grew up. There's a nice picture which I wanted to offer to you, but I think maybe Nancy Clover has it, of me sitting kind of on my knees with my son in my lap. Oh, well, I tell my students now, because I'm a video teacher and I've been teaching for years and years, and I say to them, I don't necessarily say that I learned this at the Peace Camp, but this is what I learned at the Peace Camp. The news is not what you see. No, let me start again. What happened is not what you see on the news. What you see on the news is only what happened when someone was near with a camera with batteries charged, with a fresh tape, and with the camera white balanced, which is going back to the older cameras. But you know, like, it made me realize that it was just this little glimpse of this, and all of that was happening. You know, even when you look at Stronger Than Before, you don't get a sense of that big cornfield. You don't get a sense of, and we had to pick and choose so much about what went into that, as you've probably noticed looking at the tapes. There's probably a lot of really shaky, bad stuff, which makes me kind of cringe when I think of it all being digitized and people seeing how awful, because we were beginners. But on the other hand, there would have been interesting shots that never were used, that no one has seen, that I haven't seen. I never saw all the tapes. Well, and also we weren't using external microphones some of the time because we didn't know. Like, we really were beginners. We were beginners who were committed. It was just like, it had to be done. Now, some people become documentary filmmakers because they've studied film and they decide that's their genre. We became filmmakers because of the Peace Camp, most of us. Some had started already. I had started already a little bit, but it was the other way around, you know. The project inspired the documentation rather than going around as a documentary filmmaker looking for a story. We weren't that. Well, I have to be honest, by that point I wasn't playing that much of a part, because that, I think, was September or October. You know, there were other people who came forward and said things like, I've got time to log tapes. I think I was pretty tired by the end of the summer, and I had a young child at school, and I was doing a full-time job and driving quite a long commute, nearly an hour, down from Somerville down to Norwood every day. And so it was other people really that did that. But I was still in on the meetings, and I was still in on the discussions. And, you know, there were some very heated discussions. Like, there are some quite famous women who are on the video, and their names I never put under them. And there was a real discussion about, if we're thinking about equality and all, why would we put this woman's name and not that woman's name? So that was a big discussion. Another really big discussion was whether Linda Rubin would have a credit, separate credit as an editor. And we discussed and discussed and discussed that, because everyone else was just listed. We all were listed as participants, and Linda was listed as an editor. And really, I think it came down to we had to acknowledge that no one else could do it, and she wanted that, and she needed that because she was going to go for editing jobs. And so that's where kind of the real world came in. And I have no problem with that decision, but it was a decision that was hashed out. Consensus can be really frustrating, and especially, I think the tendency is sometimes, maybe always, to think that the problem is that person, not the problem is consensus making, you know? We weren't that experienced, and in fact, in the end, we had an outside arbitrator come in and help us sort out some problems. So it was after the heat of the moment, you know, like after all the going out there and coming back and going out and coming back. But somebody was supplying tapes. I think we were begging used tapes. And the gas always had to be paid for. And then coming home, people had to be dropped off at their homes, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning. You had to be driving all over Boston, dropping people off, or 1 o'clock in the morning, and you didn't get home till 2. There were really unsung efforts that all were a part of the whole thing. Like, if people hadn't been paying for gas or hadn't been driving people, it wouldn't have happened. But it was surprising that hardly anyone else came with cameras. Hardly anyone else came with video cameras. I think some women from New York City came up at one point. But I only have a small picture of it because I was only there I'm not even sure if I was there 2 or 3 weekends. But I know I was involved in it the whole summer, really from February for the following year. I remember we were at a New Year's party dancing away, and one of the women in the collective who was from Ireland, and she said in her strong Irish accent, "You know where we should go next?" It was after we'd done the peace camp thing. "We should go to Nairobi." And I said, "Nairobi? Why?" And she said, "Because that's where the next, United Nations Women's meeting is going to be." And so that seemed like a great idea. And so we started having like another little group that wanted to go to Nairobi, and we fundraised and everything. And you see, one of the great things about the fact that we won that JVC prize is we won a camera. And then we needed to raise money to get us, the group of us that wanted to go to Nairobi, and to get a VCR and a second camera we got at the very last minute. And off we went. And that was fantastic. So 83 was the peace camp, 85 was Nairobi. And actually in 95 I went to Beijing. But I went from Australia. Oh my gosh.
Is that it?
That's it. Sorry.